All right, great. I'm gonna get started. So we'll do very quick introductions and then hand it off to Tim and Sami to lead us through conversation. My name is Hani Azam. I run an organization called Viaka, and there's a community aspect of Viaka called the Viaka Network, which is home to founders, investors, tech operators across the world who have an interest or connection to the MENA region, whether they're building in the region or building outside that. What brings everyone together is a connection or interest in the region. And we host monthly demo days for founders in our network, as well as more informational webinars like today's. So really excited to have you all here. Thank you so much for joining on a Saturday, and also Ramadan Mubarak to those who are observing. Wish you all a blessed month. We're really excited today to partner with a great organization, LebNet, to put this on and to share it with you. And we have LebNet's executive director, Janine, here. So Janine, I'll let you do a quick introduction of LebNet as well.
Thank you, Hani. Good morning from San Diego, everyone. I am Janine Aii, LebNet's executive director since March of 2021. LebNet is the premier diaspora network for high-tech professionals of Lebanese descent in North America. We are committed to enabling tech entrepreneurs and professionals of Lebanese descent succeed on a global stage. On the entrepreneurship side, in the last year, and to help entrepreneurs through the crisis that is going through Lebanon, we have partnered with Endeavor to provide mentorship to founders and startup funds. We are also partnering with Razor Capital, specifically on its Lebanese Founders Fund, to promote it and its portfolio companies. Before COVID and the crisis in Lebanon, we had what we called the LebNet Ignite program. It was an anchor program that was designed to immerse Lebanese startup in the Silicon Valley culture. It has been on hold, and we're hoping to bring it back in the near future. Thank you for this opportunity, Hani, to join this morning, and I'm really glad to be here.
My pleasure, Janine. We're so happy to have partnered with you guys on this. So in terms of today's event, I'm going to hand it over, as I said, to Sami and Tim shortly. We're going to give them between 30 and 40 minutes to have their conversation. As we're chatting, folks in the audience, feel free to throw questions into the Zoom chat. And then around 1:15 or so my time, so after about 30 minutes, we'll start to open up and get some of those questions in front of both Sami and Tim and give them the opportunity to respond to them. Real quick about Tim and Sami, I'm really excited to have them both. Consider them both close friends as well. Tim is a former startup founder, now an operator working at a startup based out of Paris. He also writes a great blog that I highly suggest everyone subscribe to if they're looking to learn more about emerging startup ecosystems across the world. The blog's name is The Realistic Optimist. I'll put links in the chat to everything that I've mentioned thus far. But The Realistic Optimist highlights how different countries across the world are developing their own startup ecosystems, as well as what types of lessons these different startup ecosystems can learn from each other. And of particular relevance to this discussion, Tim wrote a couple months ago a post called "The Lebanese Startup Ecosystem Hasn't Failed. It's just not solely in Lebanon anymore." And so I'm sure a lot of the basis for this discussion comes from the research and conversations that he had for when writing that piece. Tim will be chatting with Sami Saad. Sami is the VP of Investment at IM Fndg. IM Fndg is one of the premier investment institutions in Lebanon, investing and supporting both Lebanese founders and investors. They have a slew of different programs, as I mentioned, that support both early stage entrepreneurs as well as investors in Lebanon who are looking to invest in those entrepreneurs. It groups IM Ventures, which is a $38 million program funded under the USAID Lebanon Investment Initiative and IM Capital, a $20 million program funded under the USAID MENA Investment Initiative, both of which contribute to building the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Lebanon. So can't think of much better people in the world who can speak very intelligently about Lebanon's startup ecosystem, especially over the past 5 years or so, than Sami. With that, really excited to turn it over to you two, Tim and Sami. And as I mentioned, to those in the audience, again, thank you so much for joining, and feel free to put questions, thoughts in the chat as the conversation goes on. All right, Tim, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Sami, for the introduction. Thanks, Hani, for the introduction, and thanks, Sami, for having this conversation with me.
Thank you, Hani. Thank you.
Thanks, Janine, for kind of spearheading all of this. Sami, my first question for you is the following. It seems that the Lebanese startup ecosystem was cut short of what seemed to be a promising couple of years with a Circular 331, amongst other things. Can you briefly go over the past couple of years, Circular 331 in particular, and then what went wrong?
Okay, so for the Circular 331, it started in 2016. So when BDL, the Banque du Liban, the central bank, started the program, and it funded from the banks around $600 million. And those $600 million were planned to be invested in Lebanese-based startups. The aim was to establish VCs, venture capital firms in Lebanon, that would then invest those $600 million in startups that have export potential and that would employ people or create jobs inside the country. So we're not, as a VC, we're not part of this program, but other VCs were part of it, and they started investing in 2016, which the deployment of these funds continued up until 2019 when the crisis hit. But then everything stopped. BDL stopped funding this program. Startups that were promised funding found themselves without any kind of funds. And then, as you know, with the banking crisis, even if you had money at the bank, then you can't have access to your money, and you cannot do anything with money that's stuck at the bank. And then we ended up in 2020 with a startup ecosystem that was decimated. So there was no funding, there was no VCs, there was no funding from outside Lebanon because no one trusted the banking sector here in Lebanon, and so there was no foreign investment. And so the ecosystem ended up on life support, where you had only USAID funds and EU funds that were supporting mostly on the early stage phase. So yeah, the 331 lasted for, let's say, 3.5 years, and it was almost half deployed. $300 million were almost deployed, out of which a very low percentage of startups that got funding were able to survive everything that happened. And so yeah, that was the situation prior to 2020.
Okay, thanks for that. And for the startups that were caught in the crossfire but survived, what was kind of the escape route for those startups to figure out a way to continue operating even as this was going on?
Yeah, so a lot of these startups were already, so as we were saying, the main aim was to fund startups that have export potential. And so VCs were investing those 331 money in startups that are mostly tech companies that were selling their services in the MENA region and in the GCC specifically. And so automatically those startups were looking at the GCC market for funding. And so they started searching or fundraising in the GCC, but had a lot of hard time to find really good investors there, because they were mostly established in Lebanon. So they had their entities in Lebanon, they had bank accounts in Lebanon, and they were caught off guard with this crisis. So they didn't have any foreign bank accounts, any foreign entities, which was something that really was, not acceptable for investors in the GCC. But then they were like in around 2020, they were all preparing themselves, establishing outside Lebanon. They started to have entities, let's say holding entities in Cyprus. Some of them decided to go and establish in Europe, and also some of them established in the GCC. And then that was a hard process, and we saw that within our startups. So this transitional phase was a little bit hard. They had to go about really cutting costs, laying off some non-essential employees, and trying to survive this phase before going and fundraising again from outside once they are ready in terms of entities and in terms of bank accounts, and also in terms of weathering the corona pandemic and everything that was happening there. So it was a phase of big uncertainty for Lebanese entrepreneurs. But given our presence at the time and what we've seen, some of them were able to weather this and came out stronger.
Okay, thanks. And so fast forward to today, if I'm a Lebanese founder in Lebanon, what is the preferred legal stack for my startup? So where do I incorporate? Where do I get my bank account? Where do I work out of? Where do I hire my team? Because what you're saying is it's kind of become, this octopus. The ecosystem is an octopus with people everywhere. As a Lebanese founder, what's my stack?
Exactly. So the concept is, so in 2020, going back to what we're saying before, in 2020, we've decided to invest in 11 startups that were the most successful, and we helped them to establish outside, and we supported them, let's say, to establish outside and to open bank accounts outside and to fundraise from outside Lebanon. There is no go-to place to recommend for a Lebanese startup. It depends on where your focus is. So for example, if you're focusing on the MENA region, it's better to establish in a KSA or in Abu Dhabi, the ADGM kind of structure, where it's not super easy, but it's doable. And then you would be able to benefit from a lot of governmental programs and a lot of governmental support that you're going to get from there. So it's important to pick out a country or a region that is actually your market, where you're going to sell your products mostly, where you're going to be the focus of your business. That's one. Two, for the bank account, once you've established in this country, then you can open a bank account in the specific country you've established in. So again, out of these 11 startups we've invested in, we have 3 that have established in the GCC. We have 2 that have established in the US. We have 1 that's established in the UK, and we have also 2 that's established in Cyprus. And on average, it took them around, let's say, 7 to 8 months to finalize these kind of processes. Now we know better. We've learned from that process, but yeah, it's not going to take less than 5 months on average in order to complete that kind of transition.
Okay, and so as a VC who has a mandate to invest in Lebanese startups, what today is a Lebanese startup? Is it a startup that has a Lebanese founder? It's definitely not a startup that's incorporated in Lebanon. Is it a startup whose test market is Lebanon? Is it a startup who one of the markets is Lebanon? What do you consider to be a Lebanese startup today?
That's actually an interesting question. So our main aim as a VC that's fully funded by USAID and many other VCs in Lebanon actually is to empower the Lebanese economy and to create jobs. So the most two important things are economic growth and creating jobs. Now, for the creation of jobs, then it's the easy part, right? It's not that tricky to know that or to measure that KPI. So for any of our investments, even though the structure is outside Lebanon, even though the money is flowing into bank accounts that are outside Lebanon, the money is still flowing back for those employees that are employed inside Lebanon. And so I can give you an example of one of the companies that we had in our portfolio in our last fund. So one of these companies got acquired by a tech company in the US, and they had a big office which had 60 employees. So I'm saying big compared to a startup. And so they had 60 employees in Lebanon, and after they got acquired, the American company decided to keep those employees here, even though they acquired the company, because first of all, you have a workforce that is really highly skilled, and that is way much cheaper than in the US. And so there are some kind of advantages still in the Lebanese market. Now you still have that kind of issue with employees wanting to stay in Lebanon or not, or maybe this kind of fear of skilled labor to remain in Lebanon. A lot of them are going outside, but we're not tackling that at the moment, but we are trying as much as possible to create a certain environment that would encourage the skilled labor to stay in Lebanon. And I'm going to touch on that maybe later on in the discussion. And so for the first part, it's easy to measure. So any Lebanese entrepreneur, any entrepreneur of any origin, any startup anywhere in the world that is looking to open an office in Lebanon and employ people in Lebanon has the opportunity to fundraise from IM Funding, because at the end of the day, this is what we want to do. We want to create jobs in Lebanon. Now, for the economic part, this is the second part, that's a bit tricky. So, and we're trying to do a study here and to check what are the ripple effects of our investments in Lebanon. So, for example, the employees that are making their wages in dollars, that's one of the measures that are the easiest, to put down on a paper and to see so how much money is coming in for those employees. Then the second part is, if a startup is in Lebanon and is selling its products inside Lebanon and outside Lebanon, usually it's selling its products in Lebanon at a cheaper price than it's selling outside. So that's an economic benefit somehow for the Lebanese economy. So that we are trying to also measure that and putting it in a study. Furthermore, the supply chain, effect. So usually we're also trying to encourage our startups or the startups that we're investing in to leverage on the Lebanese ecosystem and to purchase stuff or to purchase services from Lebanon, to do agreements with Lebanese-based suppliers. And that's also a kind of a ripple effect or a secondary effect that is beneficial for the Lebanese economy. So yeah, we have those two parts that we're focusing in right now.
So it's interesting you say that, in your investment mandate, you want the companies that you're funding to contribute to the Lebanese economy by buying and working there. At the beginning of the conversation, you talked about how a lot of the ecosystem actors today were foreign aid organizations by way of most local VCs that had signed up to Circular 331 be kind of rampaged by the economic crisis. As a foreign aid organization whose mission, at least in Lebanon, is to help the Lebanese economy, aren't you scared that could, when they get involved with startups, kind of defeat the purpose of a Lebanese startup whose essence is to expand out of Lebanon and reach scale outside of the country as fast as possible. And my overarching question here is, aren't you scared that as foreign aid organizations get involved in the Lebanese startup economy, Lebanese startups become SMEs and not VC backable startups?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you mean that, if I understand well your question, that there is not much impact on the Lebanese, actual impact on the Lebanese economy. This is where so the impact is not enough. This is.
Well, my question would be, are foreign aid organizations' KPIs matching the aspirations of a Lebanese startup founder?
Yeah. So that's an interesting question, because like when we were doing this transitionary phase, so we were transitioning from only investing in Lebanese established companies with Lebanese-based accounts and all of that, and there was we couldn't continue like that, so we had to change. And so there were discussions, let's say, with USAID, and there were a lot of discussions of what to do next. And we wanted to continue with our support, but we wanted to also be creative, because you have, as with many developing countries right now, you have governments that are not responsive. You have governments that you cannot rely on. So in Lebanon, you have barely no electricity that is supplied by the government. You have a really infrastructure that is crumbling. So, and you have a lot of, strikes and everything. So the government, you cannot depend at all on the government. And so it's really hard to say we want to stick out with our initial mandate and just invest in Lebanese-based organizations and all of that. And that's why we shifted our KPIs, and we shifted the focus to supporting really the jobs creation and supporting the entrepreneurs that want to contribute to jobs creation and to contribute to the economy, as I was mentioning before. And that's where the focus has shifted, and foreign organizations were okay with that. I mean, not everyone was on board with that, but I mean, when it comes to USAID, they were okay with that, because that's something that would still be highly beneficial for the economy, highly beneficial for the startup ecosystem in Lebanon. And also, it's a kind of temporary solution until we can, go back to a government that is efficient, go back to an economy or a banking system that is well functional. And that's maybe where we can come back to our initial kind of thinking of everything that's Lebanese-based, with Lebanese-based banks and everything of the sorts. And so, yeah, and at the same time, it's not just a focus on this part. It's also a focus on the investors' part, and encouraging investors to also invest in Lebanon. So all of the funds that we were creating were kind of half funded by our funds, which are USAID funds, and the other half is funded by investors. Most of them are private investors, and we were able to do 2 funds in the last 2 years. Both of these funds were 12 million, out of which 6 million were from USAID, and the other 6 million were from private investors. Most of them are Lebanese expats or Lebanese that are based in Beirut. So yeah, we're kind of trying as much as possible to work with the current situation and adapt as fast as possible to be able to have the highest impact.
So what's interesting is that you say that today, the support of the Lebanese startup ecosystem, at least priority number 1 is getting companies and getting startups to grow, instead of trying to rebuild the institution's credibility, engage with the government, engage with banks. When do you think that your role is really to help startups and let the regulatory kind of get its stuff together? Or is there a phase where you're going to say, okay, well, I did my part of helping the startups and getting the startup ecosystem kind of growth numbers up again. Now I have to re-engage. So my question is, are you fully, I'm done with engaging with Lebanese regulators, or are you, I'm growing and I'll hit a point where I'm like, okay, now I can go back and try to get the institutions back up?
Now, when it comes to institutions, it's actually kind of a tricky question because there's a lot of reforms to be done. There's the IMF that's trying so hard with Lebanese politicians to do a deal, and unless there's a deal with the IMF, I don't think there's any chance of collaborating with any official in the Lebanese government, because there's a lot of reforms to be done. There's a lot of reform, especially for the banking system, and especially when it comes to the judiciary situation right now. So, and that's something that's bigger than us, and that's something that's way more complicated. And so again, it is something on the back of our mind. So once there's anything that's going to happen there, any improvement there, we'll be more than happy to engage again. We'll be more than happy to try and work with the government or work with the official institutions. But right now we're just being pragmatic, and we're doing what's best for actual people on the ground.
Okay, makes sense. And so, since the crisis and the purchasing power of the average Lebanese person dropping drastically, how have startups in Lebanon been adapting to the local market? So have they reduced their prices for Lebanese customers compared to neighbors, I don't know, in Saudi Arabia? Like, how are startups with their operations in Lebanon specifically adapting to the completely falling currency value?
So at the start of 2020, startups had lower prices in Lebanon compared to what they were selling in the GCC, for example, or in other countries in the MENA region. And they could do that because their salaries were still, so their employees' salaries were still not fully adjusted. Right now, all startups have adjusted fully their salaries to their not fully to their pre-2020 levels, but kind of 70% or more to what salaries were before the crisis hit. And so prices have also recovered in the same manner. But so prices are now, we can say, almost 70% to what they were pre-crisis. And so prices in Lebanon for any product that these startups are selling are usually lower than what it is in, let's say, Saudi Arabia or the UAE. So there's still some kind of benefit for the economy. And when it comes to salaries, it was not just as, it was not easy to maintain that kind of advantage of low salaries for these startups because they had to increase again their salaries, because as you know, the workforce was really leaving Lebanon, and especially when it comes to developers and tech and marketing, those kind of high demand jobs, they were leaving the countries for extremely better offers outside. And so the Lebanese startups had to go and match again whatever they were getting paid outside of Lebanon to be able to be competitive again and to maintain their talent. And so some jobs have recovered in terms of salaries, some other jobs have not recovered their full kind of salaries before the crisis. So especially when it comes maybe to customer support, maybe after sales services, these kind of jobs have not fully recovered their value of salaries, but other jobs have even increased compared to 2019, just to maintain them in these companies.
Okay, interesting. And so in the current landscape, are there a couple startups in particular that you're excited about, that you think could prove to be maybe the exit that relaunches faith in the ecosystem? What's kind of your take on exciting stuff happening?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of startups. I won't lie to you. So a few months ago, or maybe last year, we were more excited than today, because now foreign investors are really reluctant to invest. Valuations are down. What's happening in the US right now. So the whole VC market, the whole VC industry is in a shock. And after 2021, really everything changed. We have a lot of high potential startups that are expanding outside. But I think it's going to be hard for them to access funding during this year or next year. So everyone is going into the strategy of cutting costs and doing away with, reducing a lot their risks and maybe trying to reach their break-even point sooner than was expected in order to survive this year and maybe next year of this kind of low investor interest in investing right now in this climate. If I wanted to pick out maybe two interesting startups, I don't want to name anyone, and I think there is, we have in our portfolio, we have a Basma. So that's an invisible aligner company. That's really an interesting kind of business. We have also Suhati, which is a healthcare e-commerce platform. And also maybe we have Totters expanding in Iraq as well, focusing on these kind of markets that resemble Lebanon. Hopefully we see something on that front from these kind of startups. For sure, there are more also as exciting startups, but that were the three that came to my mind right now.
Okay, last question, I think, Hani. I think time seems to be up. If I'm a Lebanese founder approaching IM Fndg today, would you tell me to start with the Lebanese market? In what cases would you not tell me to start with the Lebanese market? How would you, as a Lebanese founder, where should I start and when should I come to Lebanon?
As a Lebanese founder, starting out in Lebanon would be great because it's a great pilot market. It's always been, it still is. For sure, it depends on the product you're going to sell or on the service you're going to sell, but it's great to test your product in Lebanon. You have a lot of diversity of consumers, and you can test out your products. You have high income individuals, you have low income individuals. It's really a small and diverse market. So it makes it really low risk to test out your service or product here, and then try to kind of recreate any success that you see in Lebanon outside. It's still too tricky, right? It's so different if you want to go into KSA, if you want to go into another MENA country after completing this pilot in Lebanon, but it can give you a bit of just insights into how you can deal with the region. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. That was my last question. Hani, handing it back off to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you both so much. We'll open it up for questions from the audience. If anyone has a question, feel free to either raise your hand or put it in the chat. I also can get things started myself with a question for you, Sami, which is beyond, you mentioned IM Fndg's mandate is global as long as it's creating an economic benefit in Lebanon, but beyond actually establishing a company and hiring employees in Lebanon, for the Lebanese diaspora, what are ways that you would suggest for them to get engaged with Lebanon's startup ecosystem? How can they continue to learn more after this discussion? How can they even get involved potentially with Lebanese startups?
Now, for the Lebanese diaspora, it's really important so we'd like for anyone that's that still has a connection to Lebanon and to help and support these startups, especially when it comes to expertise. So we have a lot of Lebanese outside Lebanon that have worked for maybe the big tech companies that have really good experience. Maybe they were founders outside Lebanon. They have a lot of experience in that industry or or another industry, and that's important to link the Lebanese diaspora with our startups. And that's something that we're doing right now, actually, with you, Hani, which is very, very important and very helpful for our startups, because they need that kind of expertise. And another thing that they can engage in is investing some money. And we actually encourage this through many programs that we do, and we also offer equity guarantee. So we've established many funds, angel investment funds, that have small tickets and that have been 50% equity guaranteed. So if you invest, let's say, a certain amount, you get a guarantee of 50%, which reduces your risk. Right now, we're not doing this, but maybe we would do this maybe at the start of next year. And so that's another way to encourage the flow of money to Lebanon and the support that can be given from Lebanese diaspora to Lebanese startups.
Great, thank you. Richard posted a couple questions in the chat that I'll read out. So first, is it easier for tech sector startups to move offshore? What do you suggest for non-tech startups in Lebanon? Trading, like in trading industries or like industry itself, agricultural. Yeah. How it would be interesting, I think, to hear just a quick overview of the situation for companies like that, and also ways that ways that people outside can support those kind of industries.
Yeah, so just to clarify a bit. So whenever you wanna open up shop in Lebanon, or if you wanna employ in Lebanon, you still have to have an entity in Lebanon. But the holding entity, so you'd have a structure where you have a holding entity that's outside Lebanon, and this holding entity is the one that's gonna get the investments, let's say from foreign investors, that's gonna trust this holding entity. So the subsidiary in Lebanon is the one that's gonna employ in Lebanon and do everything. The investment is gonna come through the holding company outside Lebanon. Now, for tech, I agree with Richard. For tech, it's easy because risk is really limited. So if something happens on the ground in Lebanon, it's easy to move the whole team outside Lebanon. That's I'm talking from a risk perspective for the company itself, for the startup itself. So it's easy to move that team outside Lebanon and continue their operations, because also most of their business would be outside Lebanon. Now, for industrial, agricultural, and trading, it's more risky, but it's still a viable place to do business, because again, you have cheaper kind of labor right now in Lebanon, cheaper kind of labor, expenses, and you will have access also to a lot of support from many organizations. So especially when it comes to clean energy, especially when it comes to expertise in agriculture and industrial production, you have a lot of grants. So yes, you can have a lot of support to reduce your risk in doing business in Lebanon and in investing in Lebanon. So it is a possibility, yeah. But you'd have to have a business model that's beneficial for the local economy, or that's really something innovative in terms of maybe the environment, clean energy, something like this that's really going to attract grants or other types of funding that are coming from outside foreign government funds.
Yeah. Maybe that's also give you a chance for a quick segue, Sami. I know that IM Funding recently announced I believe, solar-related fund. Do you want to just share quickly?
In the last two funds, so we had an SME-focused fund, and now we're establishing the solar fund. We're trying again to fill the gaps in this ecosystem. And so once the energy crisis hit, and given that it's within our mandate to encourage jobs creation in Lebanon, if you have no electricity, it's really hard to create jobs, right? So you'd have to also work on this side where the government is failing. And so we came up with this fund where we were going to offer any company that is of a certain size the option to lease, to lease solar equipment or any kind of equipment that would help it either reduce its energy consumption or create energy through solar PVs or any kind of renewable energy solution. And so, yes, we are encouraging that type of investment. And it's gonna reduce the cost actually on any company because they are already paying for the generators, for private generators, at very high cost. So the product would even let them reduce their energy spending during the lease phase, and then reduce it significantly after the lease is complete. So and we're aiming for, so the fund is for 20 million. We're aiming to fundraise. Now it's 4 million. We're aiming to fundraise for the remaining 16 million, and to deploy it hopefully in the coming year or year and a half.
Very exciting. And yeah, I think it addresses, a challenge across some of these markets in MENA, in emerging markets in general, is this challenge of like business continuity and ensuring that
exactly,
like we take it for granted here in the US, but that a company has just the basic means that enable it to function for 10, 12 hours each day.
exactly.
And so to ensure that that businesses in Lebanon and other parts of the region have that is foundational and absolutely essential. Richard's second question is maybe a bit related to that. You've mentioned different areas about why Lebanon is still an attractive place to do business and the benefits for outside companies. Maybe if you could just share kind of in a summary, like, and Richard mentioned that we all love Lebanon, so he's looking for like an objective perspective. Like, what are the reasons that you would encourage investing in Lebanese startups and even starting new companies in Lebanon or hiring talent in Lebanon?
Yeah, so again, it's very, objectively speaking, it's very risky to invest in Lebanon. But again, if you want to look at it from a completely objective perspective, so you want to weigh your risks and your returns, right? It's the investing kind of 101. And so your risks are really high. If you want to access funding, it's really at a high cost. And if you want to achieve some kind of good levels of return, that's really going to be hard. But if you come and if you do a certain business model that is really well studied, and if you approach the right organization, and if you access the right kind of support, because again, there's a lot of support in terms of grants and in terms of funding that is cheap funding. And so this is from the funding part. So you have access to those kind of cheap funds or even grants to establish, which would reduce your risk significantly. And then you can have access to a lot of cheap labor if you are a manufacturer or if you're in an industrial or agricultural business. So that's also would a bit reduce your cost and again, reduce your risk. And that would help you in achieving a higher return. Now, so it's not the easiest thing to do. So you'd have to have a certain kind of link to Lebanon. You'd have to have a certain passion for, supporting the local economy, supporting the local communities. And so you'd have to have a certain link to be able to, decide to do this in Lebanon, because it is hard, but it is objectively achievable.
Awesome. If there are no other questions, Janine, I don't know if you wanted to get a last word in as well. Go for
Sure.
it.
I just wanted to, first of all, Sami, I get this sense of I get a positive energy from you, which is really amazing given what you're up against. And I'm really grateful for your faith and belief and continuing to push and try to help the entrepreneurial scene in Lebanon. Tim, thank you for shedding light on the ecosystem there. There was one thing at the end of your write-up that said we are pioneering, again, Lebanese are pioneering this global model for entrepreneurship. And it does come out of necessity and an unbelievable turbulent phase. But yeah, it feels to me that we can teach others, as this is the future of entrepreneurship, is more of a global stint. We can be an example and we can teach others. Are you getting opportunities, Sami, to take this model that got developed over the last few years or recent years and explain it to others to help get that going globally?
Yeah, I mean, we're always mentioning this kind of thing that happened in Lebanon, and so I'm continuing my studies here in Paris, and I'm actually talking with a lot of my colleagues, and everyone is worried about where things are heading. Everyone is worried about the banking crisis maybe happening in Europe, in the US, and I'm always telling them what happened in Lebanon and like inspiring them, and that you can do things, you can solve problems that are really complicated. It's not always gloomy. You can always do something about it, and it's really important in this kind of world where everything is uncertain now. So you have wars, you have in Europe, they're talking about electricity cuts maybe next year. In the US, again, we're talking about a banking crisis. Now there's a problem in the VC industry in the US after SVB. And so I think this model can be replicated. And there's a lot of insights that can be taken from what happened in Lebanon, and that can be really helpful for any kind of country. Maybe I will not push it as far as saying the developed world, but maybe countries that are similar to Lebanon. So maybe we can say countries that are really passing through the same kind of financial crisis like we're passing through, and they can learn a lot. So yeah, I think we can do a study or something, or we can develop a certain, come up with certain like official recommendations. We still haven't done something like that, but yeah, hopefully we can do such a study along the way. Yeah.
And I think what's really interesting, Sami, is that as you said, Janine, the Lebanese ecosystem kind of developed that way by necessity in a bid to become more resilient in the face of internal economic shocks. And as we've seen with SVB, and Sami, you said not the developed world. I wouldn't be so sure. I mean, no one's safe, even though the risks are lower. But I think what's really interesting in the way the Lebanese ecosystem adapted to extremely violent internal economic and political crisis is that in some way it provides a blueprint for other startup ecosystems if it were to happen back home. So I think that's super interesting. I think, Sami, you're truly realistically optimist.
Yeah. I mean, this is like we have to be like this in this kind of world, because like if we're not optimists, I mean, we cannot survive this.
Awesome, great. Well, thank you, Tim and Sami, so much for sharing your perspectives. Janine and LebNet, thank you so much for partnering on this. It's really been a pleasure to hear and learn throughout this hour. This has been recorded, so I'll also send an email out to everyone that RSVP'd with a link to the recording. So definitely check that out. And yep, that's about it for us. Again, thank you so much for joining us on a Saturday to listen to this really interesting, fascinating topic. I really like the point at the end that there's applicability here, I think, well beyond Lebanon and the Lebanese case. So yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Hani. Thank you, Janine. Bye, Tim.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.